Nice to see you.
Oh man, I can see the Hicks armor back there.
Yes.
And congratulations again on the field jacket. That's awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Actually, I will again kind of plug for you the Stuff Dreams Are Made Of podcast. I know you're a hiatus at the moment. Big fan. I followed every episode and have really enjoyed it. I'm not a collector myself. I just love the movies you guys love. And
We've just got a bunch of books in the background.
yeah,
That's fantastic. Everybody collects something, but that's great. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be back this summer shortly-ish. So new episodes this summer.
awesome. I definitely recommend it to anyone who loves movies in general and just movie props. Is there a new prop for this season that excited you or for fans to see?
They're always making new stuff. I'm trying to think. The first season was such a bonanza of stuff. We built the throne and model and the light up painted table. There was so much exciting stuff there. I think this season I'd probably go to our new saddlery. I mean, whenever we introduce a new dragon, it comes with new saddlery, and it's actually the one physical thing that we actually build around the dragon because everything else happens in make-believe land. So, and I'm always so excited to see what they do with it. And I kind of give them a briefing on the dragon and how old it is and who wrote it previously to try to give them an idea of like, well, how old should this thing look and what kind of condition it's in. So I think probably this season I was most excited to see, I would say probably a Silverwing saddle. That was an exciting moment. We talked a lot about Silverwing and we saw Vermithor briefly in season 1, but certainly there was no physical saddle built yet for that dragon. But Silverwing, we talked a lot about her history as kind of Queen Alisanne's dragon, and I always said she would have used her the way Queen Elizabeth used like the Britannia. It was it was like her like diplomatic tool. It was like the dragon that she used to progress all over King's Landing to meet with the lords and ladies, but also to meet with the small folk. So it was really during Jaehaerys's reign, it was very much like a diplomatic tool, and without everybody that's read the book obviously knows where this goes, but I just find it very ironic who takes that saddle next and compared to Queen Alysanne. So we talked a lot about that, and you'll see a lot of that went into the making of that particular saddle.
Now, as a horse rider, I approve of tailoring it to the individual and making sure they have their preferences catered to.
Yeah, but a lot of these saddles in this world, they get inherited because the way we have it is the saddles are never taken off. I mean, essentially, the saddle is put on the dragon a few times in their youth as the dragons grow, but the way we have it in the backstory of it, none of this is ever explicated on film, but you can kind of see it when they're training young Vermax. We had this idea that when the dragons are very young, they would almost put these like mounts when the armor was pliable to fit under the skin. So they would essentially like grow into these mounting hardware so that if you did have to replace the saddle, you could. But essentially what happens is the mounts grow apart and then you just keep sort of remounting it to where it is. But I imagine nobody's climbing up on Vagar and like unsaddling the dragon and resaddling it. It grows up with the saddle on its back and it's out in the elements and whatever. And that's all part of the story. In this world, if you inherit a dragon from a deceased rider or something, you're inheriting the saddle of whoever had it first.
Yeah. So it's basically shaped. So the first rider, maybe not a prop that you'll be taking home and putting in your living room because I imagine most of them are fairly sizable.
They're big. Yeah, they're big. And they come with a whole buck. So it's like the saddle and the shaped buck. It's partly leather work, but it's also the big blue styrofoam thing that then becomes the dragon's back. So it's part physical thing that the rider's sitting on, and then at some point it blends into digital world. So yes, they're very large, and I have to be somewhat reserved about how much stuff I'm hauling home and does it fit in a storage cube or not.
And now before this, we actually reached out to fans and asked them if they had any questions after the first episode to see if there was anything that they wanted us to ask. Most of the reactions were blood and cheese, and the differences that there were based on how the scenes described in the book. And you've already gone over some of that with Hibbard, but there were a couple of points that we thought we could dig into a little bit more.
Sure.
For example, there's quite an absence of guards in this scene. I mean, in the book, Blood actually has to kill the guards protecting Helene and Alicent and the children. So why are they unguarded in this particular? Was there a thought between that, or just making it a little easier to choreograph the whole?
Well, we were trying to lean into the idea that we're showing and not rather than telling, but the idea is that the rat catchers kind of move around the castle sort of unseen. They're the part of the invisible downstairs part of Downton Abbey. And
Yeah.
just the idea is that you actually meet Cheese. If you go back and watch the episode, you meet him at the top of the first council meeting, and he's almost, I mean, he literally is invisible. Like, they don't even acknowledge him as he passes. He knows they're coming. He stops, he lowers his head, and they go by. So we did a lot of work in the first season to set up the rat problem in the castle, and it's growth in number. And then the idea was that the way that they were able to just sort of slip through unseen is just by being the help, and it's the middle of the night, and they're walking through the back galleys and back parts of the castle. And Allison's, obviously, her room was supposed to be being guarded, but Cole was inside the room instead of outside. But the idea is that,
you know, still guarding in a way.
He was very close to her at the time. Yeah, the idea is that obviously there would have been guards posted, and we saw them in the throne room. That's where the heavy concentration of Kingsguard is. They're between them and the king. But even those guys don't really look up at them because they're just used to seeing them move through the castle all the time. And so we were leaning into it being an inside job versus being something where they would have to like kind of hack their way through the security in order to get to them. But the idea, part of the thing that we were leaning into with this episode is that both sides are so focused on the attack coming from without that neither one of them considers the attack from within. And again, for anybody that's read the book, we know where that's going next. And I think that part of this sort of 1-2 punch that follows as per the book is you're expecting a dragon descending on your castle from above, but there's this home invasion story that happens in both cases, because we are kind of fighting this Cold War where it's a nuclear armed conflict. Everybody wants to make their moves very carefully, because if I move too suddenly, I might get Russia to launch their nukes. And I don't want to do that. And we all understand the nukes will probably launch eventually, but maybe I won't be the first guy to do them. Or when I do, I want to know that I have the absolute unquestionable upper hand where I'm going to be able to get in and get out and also reclaim my nuclear weapon back. Because unlike a regular nuclear conflict where you're just worried about mutually assured destruction, this is mutually assured destruction. Plus, if I send Vagar into battle and Vagar dies, then I actually not only do we have nuclear fire, but I also severely hamper my ability to further wage this war. But that's a lot of the calculus that's gone into this. And I think everybody's so lulled into this sense of it's the Red Keep. How dangerous could it be? The enemy is across on an island, and we're surrounded by dragons, so that you do catch them on their back foot a bit in this episode. That's part
great
of the
music and great tension. The score was great for that, and the tension was really there, I think.
Yeah. Another aspect fans have kind of pointed out was sort of in the book, we have a Sophie's Choice kind of moment for Helena. And part of this I know is because Maelor does not exist, or does not yet exist, I think is how you put it in Hibbard. But part of it is simply that she just does what they ask her to. And I kind of, why did you decide that she doesn't try to deceive them, or she doesn't try to picture here? What is the thought behind that?
Well, we've written a very specific version of Helena. I mean, the Helena in the book exists as she's a character, but she's really there in service of the rest of her family. We don't really get a sense of who she is as a queen. And we were fascinated in crafting her character in the first season with this idea that sort of promoting the idea, ironically, that Viserys is kind of pushing, which every generation has its dreamer. It's a person that experiences dragon dreams, and Viserys is so desperate to believe that it's him, and he even conjures this idea of this dream that either had or didn't have about having the son born to him. And maybe it's almost something that he manifested, this idea that I saw the son born to me. So we like this idea that Helena, who is actually one of the most kind of Cypher-like characters in that family, in at least as chronicled by the historians, was born to Viserys, and he was so obsessed with his own dreaming that nobody ever focused on her. And we got a lot into this idea of prophecy in a time like that, and how that would be perceived, and how the person would likely be seen as odd. Aegon kind of speaks to that in the first episode. And we saw a bunch of that in last season with both actors' portrayals of the character. So we were trying to craft the sequence that was in service of the character of Helena that we had set up. And Helena perceives the world in a different way, but also in a very kind of black and white way. And I think when they tell her that, like, if you don't tell the truth, we're going to kill everybody in the room, she takes them at face value. Whereas everybody else in her family is this political player. And like, yes, Alicent would have played that scene differently. We wanted Helena as the pure innocent in this world to experience the scene through her point of view as we wrote the character in season 1. I understand the scene from the book is actually one of the most spelled out things, but when we started considering the production practicalities, the reality of getting 2 very small children of that age to act, which you cannot do. So we would have had to radically age up the children. And then you run into the problem of things that you can actually expose children to on set. So if you were playing a scene with a knife to the child's throat, you would have had to be doing a lot of double work and cutaways and things like that. Not to say that you totally couldn't do it. It just really hampered our ability to approach the scene. So we decided to just sort of open it up and say, okay, well, if we were just going in with this as the concept and with the idea that the events of Blood and Cheese as chronicled in the history were somewhat of a, call it a propaganda against Rhaenyra. What is the most awful version that Alicent would have recounted to the historians, or that would have gotten around the castle to impugn Rhaenyra and Daemon as the blackest of villains and their weird, incestuous, whatever black magic is going on over there in Dragonstone. What actually happened? And it was like there was a rat catcher and a gold cloak. They definitely set in with a mission of a son for a son. It went horribly wrong in the end. And we were also trying to like craft a visceral television sequence. So we started as a kind of a heist movie following Blood and Cheese on their mission. And then the twist in the third act is you pass their, you kind of start rooting for them in a way where you get nervous about them getting caught. And then you pass their point of view over to Helena in the third act. Again, the most innocent person really on this board at the time. So it was a host of decisions that kind of went into it. And I always say, like, I love the scene in the book. It's great as it is. And that should not challenge at all what we did in the show, and what we're doing in the show isn't challenging what's in the book. It's just part of this continuing conversation we're trying to have, how history is written, and like the fact that we're living through history right now in many ways, and things happen like January 6th, which happened on live television in the US, and people can't even agree on what happened on that day. So this idea that Fire and Blood is a true accounting of the history as accepted by these people who have chronicled it. And then there are things that very much line up. And this person was the king at this time, and this person was the queen at that time, and they had this many children and went on to whatever. But then other things sort of fall into that, how history it was interpreted, or how it was written down to push an agenda forward, or things like that.
Great. So I will go on to the opening. We love it. That's the stuff we love most of all. The history, seeing it. I know that it was your kind of idea, the Bayou Tapestry, and showing this history of them. But particularly the first section with the before Vadum, Valyria, how much of that is your work, and how much was like, did you outline like, we want to see X, Y, and Z going forward?
We actually had a super book nerd that worked on the titles company team that was the kind of project lead, and she came in with a bunch of great ideas, and we fed it, and with information that we had from George, and sort of drawing from what we knew about Valyrian history and things that he said. I don't want to over explain too much. I just think there's a lot ensconced in there that I think people can excavate. And just as the original series, the map kind of evolved over time, I think people can look forward to this telling different stories. And I think the fun way that, like, how we've done it is that the images are set the way that they're kind of drawn, but a lot of times you're seeing a very specific part of it. So in other iterations, you'll see a more kind of full part of these beautiful kind of, they're almost like stained glass paintings, the way that they're put together. They're these like tableaus that they've designed, and they have a 2D artist that goes in and draws them actually in a very medieval kind of no perspective, the classic flat medieval perspective drawing. They look like sort of antique drawings, and then their software magic turns it all into the kind of threaded work that you see. And it's wonderful. I said we're going to be selling blankets.
Yes, I'd love
sheets.
Absolutely.
I'm
the actual Bayou Tapestry is like massive.
You could see having a scene on a bedspread there, like the Doom of Valyria.
So you've changed the opening, and it's really great. We still have the same theme music, the Game of Thrones theme music. I mean, Ramin is amazing. Has there been any thought at some point that you can move out of the shadow of Game of Thrones and have a House of a Dragon theme, or are you going to stick to it?
We talked a lot about it, and this goes back to season 1 discussions. I will say simply, like, we did explore it a lot, and Ramin explored it a lot because he wanted to, he's an artist, and he's, as with anybody done anything, I wouldn't want to have to be faced with the script I wrote 14 years ago every week and have it play it every time I walk into a room. I just think that in a way that's like torture. And look, he loves it and he's very proud of it, but it's also something he did in a much earlier part of his career. So he was motivated to outdo himself. We sort of two issues. One is that theme is so ensconced in it, just the emotion that you feel hearing it. It's undeniable. You cannot like separate yourself from it. So we're fighting nostalgia. It's just like opening a Star Wars movie without the fanfare. It feels different. I will say there were creative people within the production that were more sort of willing to take a jump and a risk. And I think there were other concerns that kind of came in. I mean, this is a giant show that the company has a lot of stuff staked on. I would just say, and all these were friendly conversations. There was never anything like that, but we were always weighing against, do you take the bold route and possibly do something that everybody's like, oh yeah, that's cool, new Ramin music. I mean, of course it would be great because he made it, and not honor the original theme song. And I think we just, because this series is so closely tied to Game of Thrones, that it just felt like this was the right way to go with this one. And I came to that conclusion myself at the end, but we did do, it wasn't something that we didn't talk about. We did a full exploration, believe me.
Yeah.
Ramin did great stuff. Calls and echoes of things that you've heard across the rest of the series. That's where we are.
You've talked a bit about having a sense of what you have, sort of how many seasons you think there'll be roughly and what you have left to do. But have you settled on where precisely you want to end the show? Do you more or less know the last scene, or is that a question for later?
I believe that I have the final image in my head of what we want to do. Exactly what precedes it and how we get there, I think, is a little more up to debate. As I've always said with this, there's a wonderful thing about making this story, which is that it's complete. Wherever you end it, it's complete, unless you're 100 years into the future beyond this. And I always say, this is the Targaryen dynasty. It's the story of this particular period in the Targaryen dynasty. So saying the end is a weird thing to do, because even if you say the end in a place where everybody feels satisfied that it's the end, the next day there still is another king and another reign and story to tell. The end in the original series, the White Walkers are vanquished, Daenerys is dead, there's a new king. That is a little epilogue for where everybody goes off to at the end. And I imagine when George finishes the books, there will be the end, a point at the end of it. So the challenge here, as I always say, is if you imagine this as a multi-act play, you have to decide at the end of our story where to drop the curtain down. And I think with the sense that when that curtain drops, usually there's a feeling that the curtain rises again at some future point. So that's the challenge, is finding something that satisfies both the TV and the book audience, that satisfies dramatically. My big thing is not overstaying our welcome. You don't want to end it too early where there's too much unsettled, but you want to kind of find a place where you leave them wanting more, but you do close the chapter. Even if it's not a full, every loose end is tied up, it does feel like it's on its way to it. So we have a very much clearer idea now than I think I did even a year ago, and that will even clarify through the act of writing season 3, I think. But I'm very good with where we are, and I'm excited about it, because when you start out a big venture like this, once you get it off the ground, you start thinking about, how am I going to land this thing? and it haunts you and stays with you. So believe me, I'm more worried about it than anybody else is.
We also had some thoughts. Obviously, there's not that many, so far at least, new characters introduced. But for characters or storylines that you had to craft this season, was there anyone that was particularly challenging to work with?
No, I mean, I would say the nice thing about it, we introduced more characters than I think I realized we introduced at the end of the writing of the season. It was in the watching of the show where I realized how many new, I wouldn't say point of view characters necessarily, but hero characters that have a first and a last name. And the fun, and I think what we're very proud of this season, is how well integrated it all is into the main thread of the story. It doesn't feel, I'm also open to feedback after everybody's seen the season, it doesn't feel to me like anybody that we introduced feels like a side quest or anything like that. It feels like we were able to craft introductions and storylines for everybody that integrated with our existing point of view characters, or would find a way to cross over and integrate with our existing point of view characters. So in a way, it just felt like this enriching of our, excuse the term, tapestry as we went along. And it speaks to how well realized this world is, and well crafted Fire and Blood is, and all those things. But yeah, I mean, look, there are characters that are more challenging to write than others, but I think no, I think in the crafting of this season, it was really about, how do we get all of this new story in and still feel like we have a robust story for Daemon and Rhaenyra, and for Alicent, and for Aegon, and for Aemond, without taking screen time away from them. And again, I'm open to feedback, but I think we've done it.
You've always been very generous with praising all the collaborators, all the people in the crew that you've been working with, the writers, department head, the actors, of course. Are there any people that fans in general, or maybe the media, don't really ask about, unsung heroes like that, that just things would just fall apart if these people weren't around, but no one really knows about them or hears about them. Is there anyone you want to call out and kind of say thank you so much for?
Yeah, I mean, really, I mean, I always say it, my joke in the New York premiere was they say it takes a village. In this case, it takes a walled medieval city. I mean, the amount of people that it takes to make this show is just staggering. We have 2,500 crew members, and I found out today we're finishing our last 2 episodes, and we had over 800 visual effects artists that I've never met that worked on this show, that work in different countries at different companies that you don't cross with them, but you talk to your visual effects team and then they talk to the effects houses and the orders march down through the troops. And man, it's massive. So very grateful for all of them. I think that the two people that sort of would go by the wayside a bit are our producers, Kevin DeLanoy and Melissa Bernstein. So Kevin is our physical producer. He does hiring of the crew and the managing of the schedule and the budget. And he figures out how many cranes we need to put up here and how are we going to budget this thing. And, oh, we lost this location. We now have to slide some set work into that place so we don't shut down for a week and things like that. And then Melissa is what we call our non-writing producer, our non-writing EP. And Melissa does a lot of she's sort of like the consigliere for myself and for the directors on the set. So she's filling in all the gaps. She's a creative producer. So she's on set saying, hey, is that hat anachronistic, all the way up to like watching cuts with me and giving notes and things like that. But then she's also sort of relationship, making sure the cast is looked after and taken care of. And when marketing wants to come do a shoot on set, she's doing this seems to be the kind of a weird sensitive day to be that actor out of their work to go and do a photo shoot. There's all this stuff that you never see in the making of a show, but like Melissa does all of the very hard sort of keeping everybody level and checking in and happy work to make sure that we get people at their very best showing up to work every day. And then she does the hard creative work of being the voice next to me when handing scripts in and sitting in the edit bay when I'm saying like, oh God, I don't know, should we cut from this to this or this to this? And she's just a voice to have there. So she does the hard job of being both a creative and a practical producer, sort of problem solving. Melissa's new with us this year, but she comes from the Vince Gilligan world. She worked with Mark Johnson for a million years. She worked on Breaking Bad and Halt and Catch Fire and Better Call Saul. She's a tremendously experienced and incredibly talented lady. But I think those are the two. Everybody thinks of writers and directors and visual effects supervisors and of course the cast, but those are the two that really, like, without them we would all dead and we wouldn't have the crane that we need on the morning.
I have to admit, that part of like Game of Thrones as well had this thing where he just grew and grew, and I think Bernadette Caulfield did a lot of that sort of production thing, the producing and getting it all. I just can't imagine. I imagine like some room just plastered of schedules and trying to get all the pieces to go together.
So many spreadsheets and schedules and color coding, and he's that guy. Yeah, I mean, Kevin is the Burnie Caulfield of our show. So the role that I think Carolyn Strauss filled in the original show would have been sort of Melissa's role. Yeah. So Carolyn was a former HBO executive that went to like run David and Dan's company and ended up doing the work of the kind of, it's called a non-writing EP is the sort of official job title.
You mentioned some books that you read, like the book with the World of Roses and the book about the Anarchy. Any titles like stuck out or that you found really interesting or kind of helped just kind of not,
Yeah, The White Ship is the most recent one, which is one of those great nonfiction books. It's like a nonfiction book the way Eric Larson, forgive me, I forget the author. You guys can name drop the author. Apologies to the author that I'm promoting your book, but I forget your name. But it's written like Eric Larson would write a history, or like David, the guy that wrote Killers of the Flower Moon. It's a nonfiction, but it reads like a thriller and a novel. If you guys haven't read it, it's great. And it's so horrifying. I mean, Medieval Times was just awful, like awful. Song of Ice and Fire is so civilized versus, I mean, your brain would reject rooting for anybody in the show if we actually did the real telling of how people would just like gouge children's eyes out to settle a score with the person on the other side of the it's just terrible. There's a ton of that for anybody that's into medieval torture porn. The White Ship gets into a lot of that, but it starts a ship going down in the harbor and William losing his heir, and that's what kicks off the whole, well, who's going to take over? And then it passes to Matilda, and then her cousin Stephen has a challenge to that because he's the male claimant. And you'll see a lot of parallels into this particular period in Fire and Blood. So really enjoyed that. The War of the Roses, I read the book 20 years ago, and there's a great one, and it has like the two symbols on the cover, and I can't remember which one it was, but it's probably the one that George pointed to a million times because I think I probably just saw it on his blog and went and bought that book and read it. But I love
I've
medieval
always,
histories.
yeah,
At some point I was trying to get a movie made about the Siege of Malta, the Siege of 1565.
yeah.
And so I read two novels or historical fictionalized accounts of it, and then there were like three real history accounts. I feel like I could walk around Malta and do a talk on it. I've read so many books on that. The Great Siege is the book that sticks out in my head. It's like that is a great story that desperately needs to be told somewhere.
Have you read Barbara Tuchman's A Distant Mirror? Is that one?
No.
Well, that was a really cool one about sort of the Hundred Years' Wars. It's a bit earlier than this, but
Oh, okay.
She wrote The Guns of August about World War One and how that started, and she did this one. I know George read it. I asked him about it. It's a very interesting period
And
as
these are
well.
nonfiction?
Nonfiction, but
Okay.
it's not. So George has read it, and it's got a narrative because it follows one particular person, Enguerrand de Coucy, who was a Frenchman who ended up having this really fascinating history during this 100 Years' War. And at the same time, she kind of talks about all aspects of the noble culture of a society, has some stories about how they had a low sense of humor, I guess we would call it today. The very raunchy stuff was going on. So when you hear like mushroom, like people like that was ridiculous. Like, no, they were really
Lowest common denominator, yes, very, very much. And at court, because it was sort of the
yeah,
impropriety
exactly.
is what made, and it was okay for the jester to do it, which is why everybody laughed. Yeah. Yeah.
The last question: have you been to Belfast yet? I know Night of Seven Kingdom is filming in Northern Ireland, and you are an executive producer on that. Have you been there yet? To see the Titanic Porter Studios?
I am very embarrassed to say I have not, but I will be
Okay.
going up at some point during filming when it doesn't stress poor Ira out.
Yeah.
First days, first season. You guys know I'm a giant Dunk and Egg fan. Going
Oh, yeah.
back to, I think I read the first Dunk and Egg probably before I even read Storm of Swords because of the publishing order
Yeah.
happened. So my love of those books goes back very, very, very deep. And he's done a fantastic job. I mean, him and the team of writers that he's worked with, they've rendered a really great version of that story that's incredibly faithful, but has expanded it and made it into a proper, exciting television show. And I'm super excited to see it come together. I've seen some here and there. Ira's been kind enough to show me, and they're doing great. He's got a great team up there. I'm excited as a fan because it's fun. Part of the bummer of working on this show is that I don't get to watch it as a fan. By the time it airs, I've seen the episode 300 times, and it's basically like you might as well just put a spreadsheet in front of me because that's how I see it. It's very hard. Now I can go back and watch season one and sort of with some joy in my eyes because it's been long enough that I've been able to forget things. But it's just the bummer of like you ensconce yourself in a world like this and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to see where all the bodies are buried. Some of the mystique is going to be stripped out of it. But I think that one is a fun one for me because largely I'll just get to watch it as a fan, and I'm genuinely excited for what they're doing up there.
Very cool. So are we.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you guys think and the fans and all that. I'm incredibly proud of the season.